Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Judith Browne Dianis has served as a lawyer, professor, and civil rights advocate in the movement for racial justice, hailed as a voting rights expert and pioneer in the movement to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. Dianis leads Advancement Project National Office's work in combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. Like many, Judith is looking at tonight's State of the Union address with a certain lens. She says at the State of the Union, President Biden must do more than push policies that allow police to keep harming Black people. This year, she argues, we need to hear more than shallow promises for solutions that exacerbate the problem of policing. Joining us now are Judith Browne Dianis and attorney Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm in New Jersey. How are you guys doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. Judith, I read your op-ed in the Grio today, in fact, and we're looking forward to what will transpire tonight at the State of the Union. But most importantly, and we'll bring Attorney Tarver into this discussion as well, because he's got clients in that position that we are all too familiar with as victims of police excessive force, brutality. But Judith, you mentioned something that I think I wrote a few weeks ago. There's just no reform in police right now, the way it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, if we, we keep seeing the same movie over and over again, and it's a horror movie for Black people, and and we keep throwing money at the problem. I mean, what other area would you just keep, or business would you just keep throwing money at it, and it is remains a problem, right? And this isn't just like a problem, but Black people are dying at the hands of police. And this is, I think it's, if we talk about culture, right? We talk about, oh, we need more diversity. Those were Black officers that killed Tyree Nichols, right? We need more training and de-escalation training. We need body cameras. Now we have body cameras. They're still killing Black people. And so, we dismantle or get rid of that Scorpion Squad that they were part of. But guess what? Those police officers with that culture still remain on that police force. Let's get rid of chokeholds. Chokeholds were already gone when Eric Garner was murdered. So I don't know what they could say that would really put out a solution that's really going to stop them from killing us.
Well, and you also mentioned that this is a system, and rightfully so, correctly so. You mentioned built on the legacy of slavery.
Right.
That is a point that many don't really delve into too much. But talk about, if you will, the importance of that and why, again, tie it into why the president should be addressing this in a profound way tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that racism and white supremacy are baked into the DNA of policing in this country. Started out as patrols, slave patrols, right, to capture enslaved people who were running towards freedom. And so not only did they do that, but then over the years, the way in which the police were used to enforce Jim Crow, and not just used, but so many of them are members of white supremacy groups, right? And so they were not only the enforcers, but they were the Klan. And and fast forward to the civil rights movement and like the ways in which the police were used to repress Black people, to squash the civil rights movement, to harm our people while we were fighting for our freedom, to today, right? Young people taking to the streets after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered. And what are they getting? They're getting tear gas, right? They're getting military style weapons used on them. And so we shouldn't expect that this system that is built from this, right, on a faulty foundation, on a racist foundation, can be reformed overnight. Or, people have been calling for these reforms for a very long time. Reverend Sharpton will say it all the time. I've been doing this for a long time, and nothing has changed. And so I think we've got to be thinking radically different about the way in which we get safety, and that it's not about police reform, but it's about safety reform. How are we changing the ways in which we think about public safety?
Yeah, and of course you'll have the show tonight. President Biden's State of the Union address will be broadcast everywhere, but he plans to invite the family of Tyree Nichols and others. And so what we generally get, and I don't know if we're going to get this solely with President Biden, but what we've gotten in the past is this symbolism. Well,
Mhm.
I think we are, and I think you're expressing this, we are long past the point where symbolism is enough.
That's right. I mean, he'll call for, the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But again, it's got things in there that would not have saved the life of Tyree Nichols or
Right.
George Floyd for that matter. And so, so that's problematic. It's going to have more money for policing, right? It's going to have, he's going to call for, because he's done it before, 100,000 new police officers on the street. I mean, at what point do we get that enough is enough, that we don't need more of that because it is harming us? And it's really important to think about this. It's not just that they're killing us, but they also are terrorizing us, right? These
Hmm.
stories about the Scorpion team that those police officers were on, which is not just a story about Memphis, but those kinds of squads exist in lots of different cities, including in Baltimore, where they have jump out boys. The way it's stop and frisk for motorists or stop and frisk for people who are walking down the street, who are innocent people walking down the street in their own communities who are getting terrorized by the police. We should not be living in terror. And what is happening is that white people get serve and protect. We get law and order. And it's not working, and it is harming our community. And we have to call it out and say, we have had enough of this, and stop with these little reforms that are going to do nothing.
Well, let's bring in attorney Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm in Jersey. And Attorney Tarver, I know you have some cases or have had some cases in which you've got clients who've been in that position that we're talking about, on the other side of that police baton, the other side of that police weapon. One of the things that whatever they carry in their belts, right? You got clients that's
Yeah,
been on the other side
yeah.
of that.
hmm it's interesting because I agree with everything that your guest has said. I have a unique perspective because I was a prosecutor and I ran the narcotics strike force. And back in the 1980s, when they first started the jump out boys in Miami, when we brought people down to train with them. So I saw what that did. That changed the complexion of policing in a very major way. Not that it wasn't already bad. I also was the city attorney for a number of municipalities, and I supervised those police officers. So, it's interesting to say that they can't be reformed because she's completely right. But if you believe that reform means change, I do believe there's some changes. And I've advocated for a long time. You can do two things to make something change in policing. It won't change because they have more concern for Black people. That's not what's going to change it, because their systemic racist attitude is going to be what it is. But two things you can do. Number one, you can have deterrence. And deterrence means that officers will be prosecuted routinely, swiftly, like they were in Memphis for those types of problems. The second thing is this, and nobody really thinks about this, Stacey. If you want to change what these officers do and how they behave, it is the insurance companies who are at the root of doing it. Because these settlements that get paid out, these expenses that get paid out when they do wrong, are paid out by the insurance companies. And if the insurance companies were to say 2 of these incidents in a year and your rates go up 75%, I guarantee you things would change in a big way, because you'd have top-down supervision. Now, that's never going to eradicate the racist system of policing. But what you can do is you can put other incentives in place. That's all you can do at this point.
Well, and Attorney Tarver and Judith Dianis, you mentioned about the insurance rates, but here's the thing with these payouts: who's actually paying this out? Where's the money coming from? Isn't it coming from the taxpayers?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
so really, part of that reform, and I thought both of you, Judith, you can jump on it. Shouldn't that be that big QI word, qualified immunity?
Judith, go right ahead on that one.
Yes. I mean, yeah, that's one of the things that needs to be done. Yeah. I mean, police officers know, okay, you ain't coming for me because the law protects me, right? And the way that qualified immunity works, people need to understand, like qualified immunity. So if I did something and let's say there was actually a story like this where an officer sees somebody, puts somebody on the curb and beats them when they're on the curb, right? He can get off because no court has held that being on the curb was unconstitutional, right? Maybe somebody being standing up or sitting on a car was unconstitutional, but not sitting on a curb when the officer beat him. So, it is, I'm trying to simplify it, but that is what qualified immunity does.
Well, it protects the officers.
Yes, it protects the individual officers. But here's the thing. You know what? I don't know that that's going to be the thing that's going to break this. Because, when you think about, for example, people say we need the death penalty because it will serve as a deterrent to people. It does not. Right. Study after study has shown that it does not show that. Those officers that killed Tyree Nichols were in a rhythm of showing their power over someone. They wouldn't have stopped to think about, I might get convicted for this, right? Because the other part of that, right, is that they didn't know that the culture, not just the law, but the culture is going to protect them. Because they then, after they killed him, they stood around, and after they beat him, they stood around and talked about the lie that they were going to tell to cover it up. Because the culture allows them to protect themselves and to protect each other.
Here's the one thing that studies have shown, that deterrence does work with people who have something to lose. And that's why I think that police officers in a number of ways may be more susceptible than most for that type of thing. But I don't disagree with you at all with that analysis. Part of the issue, though, Stacey, is you asked about what Biden can do. Right. Let's be honest and let's be real. There is not a doggone thing that Joe Biden is going to be able to do except to talk about what should happen, to show sympathy, to evoke thoughts and prayers. But he can't go into individual departments and do anything. He can't change qualified immunity. He can't, he can't do a lot of those things. So,
I think really so. But I do think, agreed, because these are local police departments, except for billions of dollars going to policing from the federal government, right? And so the stick and the carrot, right, is something, right? And what he's doing, he's pro-police. He's always been pro-police. And so
that's the Congress. The problem is that's the Congress.
So he has to have a Congress. No, definitely. He has to have a Congress that's with him, right? Because the Justice and Policing Act is not getting passed, right? It's just like in this Congress,
not happening, yeah.
Even in the last Congress, it didn't get passed. When Dems had control of Congress, it did not get passed, right? And George Floyd had just been murdered, right? And now people are saying, well, maybe, Tyree Nichols, his life will push them. George Floyd's life should have pushed them to do it, but it didn't.
Well, even before that, right?
Right. And so the thing is that, agreed. There are incentives that they can build into money that comes out of the Department of Justice. I still think that is wrong because I don't think that police departments should get more money. I actually think that what we should be thinking about is how we transform the way that we do public safety. We need to take cops out of all mental health incidents. We need to take cops out of traffic stops. We can do civilian ones. Several cities are doing that right now. The more that we can limit our interaction, Black people's interaction with the police, right, the better, because it is that little traffic stop, because you had a tail light that was broken, that ends up in your death. And that's why we need to be thinking about the ways in which we get police out of our lives.
Well, in the State of the Union, he's going to talk about public safety. What we don't see in the breakdown given by the White House, we don't see any specifics on how he's planning to lay out any options in which Congress or anyone else can consider in which they can change the police. And I think that's the aggravating factor here for many African Americans, if you will. Judith is expressing, I think, that type of, she's expressing that in a lot of ways, that we need to hear the president of the United States take the lead on the biggest platform that he has and say, this must stop. And here is some sort of plan, if not a comprehensive plan, to stop it. And we're not just talking about that same old reform, that thoughts and prayers type thing?
Well, I'm certain he's going to do that. There's
Mhm.
no question in my mind that you're going to hear Joe Biden get up there. You're going to hear Joe Biden talk about what should happen and how wrong it is. And he'll even go into some of the history of America as it relates to policing, I believe. But ultimately, what is that going to change? When you have a Republican-controlled Congress that is dominated by the likes of a Taylor Greene and a Matt Gaetz and a Boebert and a Gosar, who are openly hostile to African Americans and everything that we stand for. What is that going to change when the majority now controls the purse, the pocketbook, and everything else? That is the huge problem here. And so we have to be willing, your guest laid it out so cleanly. We have to be willing to start looking outside of the box at some other strategies. We have to, in addition to the things she talked about, we need to demilitarize police. This whole model of military.
Absolutely.
Look, I was in the United
Point.
States Marine Corps, and I will tell you something about militarization. It creates a certain mindset. And that same mindset, which is an us against them, combat minded, is what they carry over into policing. That has to stop. We have to get to a civilian based model of policing.
Well, here, just as a little bit of a preview from the White House. So he's going to highlight accelerating progress to end cancer as we know it today, bringing America's cancer research system into the 21st century, tackling the single drive of cancer deaths in the country. That's where he's going to start focusing. Then it's the veterans, right? Their families, caregivers, and survivors, reducing veteran suicide. Now, these are large fact sheets from the White House with subheads. And when you scroll down, that's the list of subheads. Mental health crisis. There is a small area in which it appears that the president will discuss safer communities, which will entail policing. It's a very small area. Everything else, large. Opioid crisis, fentanyl. So Judith, I'm just getting the feeling that we may be disappointed in what we hear tonight.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we will. I mean, first of all, he's got to take this opportunity to toot his horn, right? And he can't toot it on policing, right? He's got to talk about the economy. He's got to talk about the things that are going right. And policing is not one of them. And unfortunately, what I would want to hear from him, we're not going to hear, which is that, I've had enough of this, and what we're going to do is we're going to start cutting back this money and we're going to start putting it into different kinds of safety. That is not what we're going to hear. He could say something like that. But again, he's pro-police, so he's not going to say that. Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, Black people should know that we're not going to see the end of police killings anytime soon. Even if they got all the votes to pass that Justice in Policing Act, it would not be done. And so that's why we really have to think about a different way of approaching this. And President Biden is, again, a pro-police president. He's the person who was the author and sponsor of the Crime Bill of 1994. And so we should not expect that we're going to hear from him some kind of radical shift in the way that policing happens.
Now, Judith, you wrote
more of the same old.
But to that you wrote, this is his opportunity to show us that he sees our grief and intends to do something about it, something effective.
That was my plea and my cry. But I didn't have any thoughts that it was actually going to happen.
Attorney Tarver, so I don't know how detail you can get in with your clients that you are. I don't know if you're currently defending someone or representing someone who's been a victim of police violence, or you have in the past. I've seen some articles that were shared with me.
Yeah, we just had a press conference on Monday in New Jersey, a Carl Dorsey case, who was shot by police officers unarmed as he crossed the street. Police officer jumped out of his car, ran into him, and then shot him as he was falling backward. Again, an unwarranted shooting, an unnecessary shooting, another black life ended just simply because this police officer made a decision that wasn't rooted in law. And this is what's happening in America. This is American justice. This is how things are happening on the regular and on the daily. And Carl Dorsey's not a name you heard about, but you've heard about the George Floyds and others. There are so many of these stories that are out there of people of color routinely getting shot down, mowed down by police officers with no consequences. In this particular case we're talking about, grand jury returned a no bill, which means that they were taking no criminal action at all. Which means the only thing we're left to do is to sue, which means that once again, we go back to the whole idea of the insurance company paying out. And you asked why the taxpayer doesn't really get up in arms about this. Well, in a number of ways, the taxpayers support this because that's the price that they know they have to pay for the overseer system. You know, this is what we have to pay to keep them in line. So we'll pay out the families or whatever else like that, but you just continue to do what you need to do. So it's a very insidious system. And this is the kind of part of the work that I do here. But it's not a work that we really should be looking to as justice. You know, you can't bring anybody back. So justice is not having it happen in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you put it exactly like that, because it becomes no longer because you can't bring them back, like you said. And so someone gets 10 million, 20 million, Floyd family got 27 million. It still does not take away that pain. It does not bring that person back. Judith, the Advancement Project, I know you're doing a lot of work. Kind of tell us a little bit what you guys are up to now. What are you doing?
Sure. We work with grassroots organizations across the country on these issues of policing. So, for example, we worked with the Ferguson Collaborative when the Department of Justice went in and did a consent decree, because communities should be at the table when there's a consent decree put in place by the government. We want to make sure our voices are at the table. And so we worked with them for a number of years. In Memphis, we are supporting, there's a group called Decarcerate Memphis, which has been doing work on these policing issues for quite some time. And their demands are transparency. They also want to take police out of traffic stops. And so we're supporting them with some research. And so that's the kind of work we do, is like grassroots groups that are trying to change the way in which public safety is done in our communities. We support them with research and litigation when necessary.
Sounds like important work, Attorney Tara.
Oh yeah, that's real important work. And you know what? There's so many people on the grassroots level who are getting things done here. But it all ties in together. You know, this all ties into the criminal justice system, to the excesses that we face, to people not getting fair trials, to improper arrests, all the way up to the Supreme Court not being able to do anything about qualified immunity. People say, well, we can't do anything about. Well, you can. You can if you have the different composition of a different court. This court has showed that they are willing to overturn precedent. And so they can overturn the precedent of Harlow versus Fitzgerald, which is what brought up qualified immunity in the first place. But again, I don't want to sound exasperated, but I am exasperated because that comes back to voting rights, of which we are being abused on. So all of this, we have to understand the systems, the systemic racism, how they affect every area. That's right. Of our lives. And this is a wonderful example.
Interesting, Judith. Attorney Tarver, he came full circle, right? He easily came full circle. Voting rights and justice on that. George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and voting rights. It's interesting that they continue to connect. It never stopped connecting, right? The voting rights and this police violence, really, because when Floyd was killed, the two things that lawmakers and others talked about was those two bills, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Prior to that, when Sandra Bland was killed, I mean, we can go on, Eric Garner. It was always tied to two things, it seems. Right.
I mean, it's all connected. I mean, to your point, it's like, it is, we're in really difficult times. when it comes to racism and white supremacy in this country. You know, if you think about it, like this morning, news broke of like two white supremacists trying to like shut down an electric grid in Baltimore because they wanted to destroy the city,
Right.
black city, right? And so so all of these things are connected, and so much of it is connected to power. Who has power and who doesn't, right? And like who gets to control and make the decisions, and who gets to be held accountable, and by whom, right? And so voting rights is part of that. That struggle around voting rights is about who gets to make the decisions in this country over things like policing, right? Which is an institution that has been known to control Black people since its very beginning, right? And so we've got to be able to see the connective tissue between these issues, so that it's not just this thing over here, but it's the whole thing that we have to be focused on.
Attorney Tarver, extend for a second with voting rights. So the Voting Rights Act was something that had to continually be renewed, if as it were, right? You know the Constitution as well as anybody. How many other amendments in that Constitution has to be renewed so often, to the point where the Republicans worked for 40 years or more to get that Voting Rights Act really removed?
I'm not aware of the renewal of any constitutional rights, but the fact of the matter is, steadily and over the years, the Voting Rights Act has been chipped away. Section 5, all the other sections, by Justice Roberts and the others who sit there now and act like they are so upset about the direction of the court and call for civility when they have been doing the most uncivil thing, which is taking away the rights of millions of Americans to effectively exercise their right to vote. So we should make no mistake about where we are here. In every area of Black life, there is an erosion of our rights. And the intersectionality, as Kim Crenshaw likes to talk about, there is intersectionality in all of these things. Again, if you were able to effectively exercise your right to vote, perhaps things would be a little different in terms of the composition of this Congress. I'm not saying that that's necessarily so, but perhaps that would be it. That there's a very, very, very serious consequence to not being able to exercise your right, to being impeded in any way. And as Judith pointed out, you have groups who have made it their mission at this point, their racist mission, to make sure that power is vested in white America and it never changes hands. And they are willing to do it, as Malcolm said, by any means necessary. And we have to be prepared by that fact, and with that fact.
Well, Judith, the State of the Union is tonight. Attorney Tarver mentioned the Supreme Court. The justices will be there. It's that whole pomp and circumstance that happens all the time. But bottom line, Judith, as we go into the State of the Union, because we're going to be talking about this tomorrow morning on Let It Be Known, and then special tomorrow afternoon as well. But Judith, the bottom line for you, and really, well, let's say this. He goes into this, and like, no matter what he says or does, he could say everything we want to hear. It doesn't mean he's going to get done. But just, again, break down the importance of him being forceful about this particular issue.
Yeah. So, as we call it, the bully pulpit, right, is necessary, right? Having a president that, as I said in the piece, is like, that sees us, that sees our grief, and that is willing, at the end of the day, you want him to be willing to take some political hits, because Black people are dying at the hands of people who are supposed to protect them. And so using the bully pulpit to say that this is enough, and to show some leadership, and to even, it's like, call on Congress, but then also call on the states to do something, call on local governments to do something. Use that moment to actually show that this is an issue that must be dealt with, and that must be dealt with aggressively, and that we have to, step away from the idea that police can do no wrong. And so it's important to hear that, right? It was important when we had President Obama to hear him use the bully pulpit, right? And
Right.
so important. But again, at the end of the day, we won't see a bill passed or anything like that. But narrative is important to show that this is something that we must care about and we must do something about.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
go ahead, Attorney Tarver.
Yeah, no, narrative is important. But let me just say this. If this were Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Southerner from Texas, we never thought would have emerged as a civil rights champion. Lyndon Baines Johnson would have walked down to the floor of Congress, would have demanded to stand in front of them, would have taken his finger and pointed it at them and said, "This is what you're going to do," whether or not they did it or not. This is what you're going to do. We need that kind of strength and drama from this president on this issue. He is in that seat because of people of color. He's in that seat because of Black people. There is a debt to pay from Joseph Robinette Biden to Black America, and he can start paying it tonight.
Well, and he has the perfect setup. Unfortunately, the perfect setup, I should say, with the death of Tyree Nichols still hovering over this country, hovering over police and Black people everywhere. The death of Tyree Nichols is exactly the backdrop that was there 2 years ago, but now he's in a position to take care, to say, as Judith is, she's looking for, we all are looking for, to really, lay down the gauntlet. As you said, Lyndon Johnson probably would have done that. I shouldn't say probably, the way Tarver said it. Tarver, he would have. So
He did it.
Yeah, he did it. Yeah, you're right. He did it. He did it.
Well, that ain't happening this time.
That ain't happening. Well, you know what, Judith? The great thing is that tomorrow we have Judith with us again at noon for a special Let It Be Known with Michael Harriet of the Grio to discuss the State of the Union. So we're looking forward to, after hearing what the president has to say tonight and listening to everyone else dissect it, we're going to get the real point of view, the Black perspective from Judith Browne Dianis and Michael Harriet. Looking forward to that. And of course, we are so appreciative of Attorney Tarver as always. And we want to continue to follow your case, Attorney Tarver, because like you said, too many have not heard of that situation in the Garden State. So we want to really shed some light on that as well. Judith, Attorney Tarver, thank you so much. And we look forward to more tomorrow. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.